Hello, I'm Faith Rogers, host of today's program, COVID-19 Keeping Up with a Moving Target. This activity is jointly provided by the Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, DKB Med, and the Institute for Johns Hopkins Nursing. Today's program is accredited for ANCC and AAPA credit, as well as AMA PRA Category 1 credits. Please visit our website for complete CE information. If you're tuning into our webcast, please click the red Claim Credit button in the webinar console to attest for credit. Otherwise, please visit covid19.dkbmed.com. Today's learning objective is to discuss the implications of the Delta variant. This educational activity is supported by independent medical educational grants from Gilead Sciences Incorporated, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals Incorporated, and Eli Lilly and Company, as well as in-kind support by DKB Med LLC. All activity content and materials have been developed solely by the activity directors, planning committee members, and faculty presenters. With us today, we have Dr. Paul Auwaerter, Clinical Director of the Division of Infectious Diseases at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. Dr. Auwaerter, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Faith. Emails and questions about booster shots is probably the number one question I've received, but number two would be variants, especially the most recent variant, the Mu variant, which has been labeled a variant of interest by the World Health Organization. So this week, we'll focus a bit on the variants and try to bring up to date, at least, a general understanding. And of course, as with all COVID programs, this could be quickly outdated. But the variants are, of course, a normal consequence of viruses, which especially RNA viruses don't have a particular fidelity for maintaining a strict genetic code. And the World Health Organization has three designations. And the first, and probably the most currently important, is the Variance of Concern, VOC. And there are only four, and these have all been designated based on clear evidence of either transmissibility that's higher than previously circulating virus, perhaps worse virulence, reduced effectiveness of vaccines, or if it's somehow impacting natural immunity or diagnostics. And the four that we see here, and the first we discussed last winter was the Alpha variant, but currently Delta is the one that probably has the most impressive changes with mutations that appear to facilitate increased transmissibility in the 50 to 70% club. And at least in countries where this has become the predominant variant, it is skewed, especially in those that have active immunization programs, to those that are not immunized. And those, by and large, are younger adults and children. And indeed, at least in the United States, many states are reporting increased numbers of childhood infections or children in hospital, although all are significantly less likely in children, as has always been the case with COVID-19, than compared to older adults or those with risk factors. But what's been impressive to me, and this was true for the Alpha variant that we saw last winter, is the orange bar here represents the Delta variant, and these are viral isolates sequenced and the information collated across the country. And within a very short order from May and June till now, most recently early September, the Delta variant now is approximately 99% of those viruses that are sequenced, so is quite representative. Now, Alpha remains now a tiny component. Beta and Gamma, which had been very worrisome earlier, are a very low amount, and Delta is the predominant with the smattering of others that you see there as well. And just to emphasize why Delta has become so predominant has been that this virus seems to bind to its cellular receptor with greater affinity. That's the ACE2 receptor on host cells. And infected people tend to carry much more virus. And these are probably the factors together that mean that if someone's infected, there's potential for increased transmissibility at twofold, as you see here. For example, instead of on average one person infecting two people, it might be more in the 4 to 5 range. And what we're all striving for through vaccine or social distancing and so on, or just acquired immunity, is trying to get the number of people infected less than one. And of course, that would reduce the numbers. And although the Delta variant's something that's been around long enough now that we've gained some understanding, it's not completely sure why all the mutations in the Delta variant have contributed to its ability to be so highly infectious. But what we do know, and is perhaps also concerning, are changes in the so-called N-terminal domain of the spike protein, the protein of the virus that docks to host cells. And this spike protein provides the outer coat of the virus. And changes there have reduced the ability of neutralizing antibodies, which render the vaccine non-infectious, to bind. So it looks like you need higher levels to really do a good job against the Delta variant. And what's become very clear is that you might remember back in the winter, we said, well, gosh, even one dose of the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine seems to be protective. That is clearly not the case with the Delta variant. And 2 doses appear to offer less protection against complete infection, or any infection, I should say, compared to earlier studies, and especially in certain populations that people's immune system may not react as well to the vaccine, but appears still to be highly effective against prevention of severe illness, which at the end of the day is most important, keeping people out of the hospital or dying. I'll just briefly mention Delta Plus, which is a sublineage and has an additional mutation also seen in the beta variant called K41N in the spike protein, 417N. And this also appears to facilitate cellular entry. The CDC has stopped providing information on Delta Plus. They've just rolled that into Delta overall. But at last check in August, when they did separate it, accounted for about 15% of the variants. And there's some concern that this additional mutation could blunt immunity that might be garnered through vaccines or given by monoclonal antibodies. So those are the variants of concern, which all 4 of those variants have caused trouble in countries in one form or another. And then we have a somewhat larger list of variants of interest. Now, the way how I look at this is these have mutations that we scientists and virologists feel might have the potential to cause trouble, but aren't yet prevalent enough to transfer into that variant of concern category. And you can see a number here that you may have heard about in the news, especially Lambda and Mu, but wherever these have been first described and predominantly circulating, for example, Lambda and Mu in South America, they haven't really become the worldwide phenomenon that the Delta variant has become. Indeed, the WHO has recently reported that only 0.1% of global cases worldwide is due to the Mu variant. Now, these potential changes could impact and facilitate cellular entry or reduced antibody effects and so on, but these are sort of predicted or theoretical, but don't yet rise to the level where practically it's becoming a variant of interest. However, what you may have heard is that Mu has been concerning because of the number of mutations it has. And just by way of background, in case this becomes more troublesome, it shares features with 3 of the variants of concern. So it has 2 mutations that are very similar to the beta variant, which really caused trouble with the AstraZeneca vaccine in South Africa, whereby these mutations seem to cause some immune evasion and facilitate binding to the cell receptor. The alpha variant, which caused most infections in Europe and North America this past winter. This mu variant has one of these mutations, the P681, that causes the spike protein to cleave more efficiently and promote cell fusion so the virus can enter the cell. And then it also has one of the mutations from the Delta variant that again is in that N-terminal domain and might reduce the ability of antibodies to bind. What we know so far about the mu variant is it's been detected at some level in all United States. The WHO has reported it in 46 countries as of last week. But importantly, there are a sense that perhaps this will not become a variant of concern. And why do we say that? Well, where mu had circulated rather widely was in Ecuador and Colombia earlier this year and accounted for about 40% of infections, but now is less. And therefore, it's an argument that it will not replace Delta or cause other effects. Now, there's not a lot that we know about this mu variant yet. Will it increase transmissibility or virulence, as some of these mutations might suggest? It's unclear. The little data we have so far is from a preprint in Colombia, where the mu variant was circulating rather widely, as you can see by the blue colorings in the top A part of the graph. And in this study, what's commonly done are pseudo-neutralization assays, where you take a virus similar to COVID-19, but not SARS-CoV-2, but not infectious, and then see if, for example, serum from people that recovered from COVID-19, or, for example, sera after people got their series of vaccine are able to neutralize that pseudovirus. So what has been seen, as you can see here, is about a 12-fold reduction compared to people that had natural immunity. And those are in the B and C graph all the way on the right. But if you got, for example, an mRNA vaccine like the Pfizer vaccine, there was about a 7.6-fold reduction. And these are almost similar to what you see in the green bars with the beta variant. Again, probably those two mutations that it shares with the beta variant probably accounting for this most. Now, does this really translate into something that's especially troublesome? We'll have to wait and see, but it looks like Delta, even though it doesn't have nearly as much of a reduction, is the virus winner. So it's not all about immune escape, but there are other features of the virus that promotes its success, and probably a lot of that has to do with how much virus is made in a routine infection. Now, the last category is one which luckily we have no members of, and that's variants of high consequence. This is the variant. And the definition there is that there's clear evidence that prevention measures or medical countermeasures no longer work very well. And so this would be if, the ability to the vaccines to keep people out of the hospital falls significantly, if the overall effectiveness of preventing infection falls into low percentages, then we would have a variant of high consequence. And of course, this is the most feared issue. Now, there have been a couple of studies which I think the press have picked up on, and I just wanted to mention them and perhaps give a little more color because I don't know if it's quite as ominous as it initially sounded. So there were two reports from surveillance studies, this one from centers in 9 states in this past summer when the Delta variant has been circulating at high numbers, looking at hospitalizations, urgent care, or emergency room encounters. So it was a fairly high number of encounters, and they were looking at the vaccine efficacy. And overall, you're almost at 90%, which is really quite good, but falls if you're older. And again, immune response when you get older is not uncommon across the whole range of vaccines people get: influenza, pneumonia vaccines, and so on. So this is no surprise. However, they did break down the vaccines, and you might look at this and say, gosh, Pfizer doesn't look as robust. And we've all heard about perhaps Pfizer requiring boosters, and maybe Moderna generates more antibodies. But I just want to be clear that although these numbers are indeed look different enough that you would come to that conclusion, a lot depends on a number of factors. First of all, a lot of people who got Pfizer early on are people that might have been exposed more frequently, such as healthcare workers, first responders, or people with comorbidities in advanced age or in nursing homes, for example. Um, this would also be true for the J&J vaccine. So it's a little hard to compare, and we also don't know how many people in this surveillance may have only gotten one shot of any of the mRNA vaccines compared to two. And then a different surveillance group in 13 areas was done through this spring and summer, again, as Delta sort of came on board. And we're looking at the key things we all worry about. That is, do you land in the hospital with severe COVID vaccine, or do you die? And although the protection from infection looks a little less robust, meaning you might still get a chest cold or a head cold from the coronavirus, the protection from severe disease seems about as good as it did earlier in the year when we were predominantly looking at the Alpha variant. With perhaps, again, some older age groups, perhaps it not holding up quite as well as it had seen earlier. So overall, I think this is still news, and why I believe some scientists and vaccine experts have suggested that the need for boosters remains unclear and whether it will really move the needle. We know the Food and Drug Administration will shortly be holding a session and later on the Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices in the United States to give a more formal set of recommendations regarding booster need. So Faith, I think we have a few questions, but hopefully that variant information was helpful as background and as you hear news moving ahead in the next few weeks.
Yes, very helpful. Thank you so much. As a reminder to our learners, if you have any questions, you can submit those to qa@dkbmed.com. That's Q as in question, A as in answer at dkbmed.com. So on to our first question. In light of the U.S. campaign to administer booster shots for the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, our J&J recipients have questions about a booster of the same vaccine or transitioning to the mRNA vaccine altogether. When should we expect guidance for these patients?
I hope soon. As you may have seen, there's some concern that the single dose of the Johnson and Johnson vaccine may not be giving as much protection, and perhaps a booster will help. There's some preliminary information that suggests the second dose of J&J does indeed give higher antibody levels, which is good news. And the FDA will no doubt be getting that data from the company soon from a trial looking at second doses and protection from a disease and so on. So I'm hoping that information should be out in the next few weeks. I think the questions posed are very reasonable. It's also asking whether you should mix up vaccines and whether that affords better protection. Of course, we really don't have any quality information to give guidance there. So it's a guess whether getting a booster with a different vaccine is helpful. Now, if you're immunosuppressed, there already is a recommendation for a third dose or a second dose, as it were. And many people have gone ahead and done that. But we don't really have enough information yet to give guidance, but I think it is more likely you'll hear about a booster soon for people that have received the J&J vaccine.
Thank you very much. And here's our next question. Is it possible to differentiate between naturally acquired antibodies versus vaccinated antibodies on a serology test?
Yeah, so you can, and this is where you have to be a little careful when you're selecting a test in either your hospital setting or if you're using one of the commercial labs. And of course, if people are immunized, they're mounting antibodies against the spike protein. So if you were ordering an anti-spike antibody test, it really cannot discriminate at all because natural infection and immunization hopefully produce spike antibodies in both. However, there is another assay that looks at the viral nucleoprotein, the N protein. There are a number of companies that make that, Roche probably being among the most widely available. So the anti-N antibody to the SARS-CoV virus is probably the way to figure out if you've had COVID-19. Although, as always, there can be cross-reactivity to some degree with some of the routine coronaviruses that circulate and cause the common cold.
Okay, and our final question. As we enter flu season, what's a recommendation about concurrent flu and COVID-19 vaccines?
Yeah, so Faith, this is a different recommendation now than it was earlier in the year. So when COVID immunizations first came out, it was said to only give it by itself, mainly to observe for side effects and so on. The current thought is, especially with the need to get an influenza vaccine, as we enter into the fall, whether you're getting a primary COVID-19 series or potentially a booster, you can get both at the same time, usually in separate arms. And the idea is if you give simultaneous vaccines, the body does produce a good response to both. We know this from a number of studies looking at influenza and tetanus, pneumococcal vaccine and influenza, for example. So there's no reason to suspect it wouldn't work with COVID-19 vaccine and influenza, although there haven't been large trials looking at that, but that's the advice for this year. If you are not giving the vaccine simultaneously, you want to separate the two by at least 2 weeks. Now, that's not advised because many people never get around to the second vaccine. So the strong recommendation to get both at the same time is encouraged. But if you are separating, wait at least 2 weeks, because if you give them closer, the second vaccine response may not be as good because the body's still preoccupied reacting to vaccine dose number 1.
If you're tuning into our webcast, please click the red Claim Credit button in the webinar console to attest for credit. Otherwise, please visit covid19.dkbmed.com. Any questions or issues, feel free to email us at the address listed. To submit questions, please send them to qa@dkbmed.com. That's Q as in question, A as in answer, at dkbmed.com. Again, thanks for joining us, and thank you for your dedication to your patients with COVID-19. Thank you again for your time, Dr. Auwaerter.
Thank you, Faith, and thank you so much for tuning in, and hope the information was helpful. Hope everyone stays well.